I just found this sub, but this happened about 7 years ago. The story starts with me getting home from high school on the bus. I made it home and saw that my mom wasn't there, and since my dad was at work and my brother didn't get out of school until later, I was the only person there. I put my backpack down and go to untie my shoes, and some dude walks out from a hallway. I go into Occam's razor mode and assume that this is some sort of handyman or repair guy, since we had moved in recently and had been getting a lot of repair work done to fix the half-ass DIY electrical, plumbing, and paint jobs left behind by the previous owners. Additionally, he is wearing some sort of tool belt and fits the general repairman look. My mom usually is around when we have people working on the house, so I assume that my mom must have left not long ago and would be back soon. I nonchalantly tell the guy that my mom should be back soon, and he mumbles something like, "Thanks," and leaves out the front door to what I assume is a repair truck. At this point, I text my mom and ask when she'll be back and who's the dude in the house. She asks if I'm joking, and it's only at this point that I come to realize that I was sitting on the couch chatting with a dude burgling our house. At this point, the guy was long gone, and luckily my mom was only a couple minutes away at a store just down the road. She gets back, and we call the police, and they take a look around, but nothing actually went missing, and nothing ever really came of it. I'm honestly glad it went down the way it did, since I only knew what happened once it was already over. This guy had put himself between me and the front door, and I'm really not sure what freaked out, fight or flight me would have done. I also can't imagine what the guy was thinking when I basically just let him walk out. This happened many years ago when I worked on the 14th floor of an office building in San Francisco. I started work at 8 a.m. before the building opened, and the front doors were still locked. The front desk/security usually got there around 8:30 a.m. I used my fob and walked into the building's first floor, which was nothing but a lobby and 6 elevators. Immediately, I see someone standing there right in front of the elevators with a huge jacket on and a hood covering his face. He doesn't look at me but just keeps staring at the elevators. I was usually the only person in the building that early. My coworker, who also started at 8 a.m., would sometimes arrive at the same time as me, but usually I rode the elevator myself. I press the up button and wait for the elevator to arrive as the person just keeps standing there in front of the furthest elevator, elevator number 6, from the entrance. Something you need to know is that the elevators are locked until the building is open, so you have to put in a code, and each floor has a separate code. For instance, my floor's code was 141414 or something like that, and if you punch it in, it took you to the 14th floor. Also, 5 of the elevators go to only the 10th floor. Only elevator number 1 goes to floors 11 through 14. So as I wait, I hear the person whispering to himself. He steals a glance at me and then looks forward straight at the elevator again. I'm kind of freaking out at this point, but since you need a key to get in, I still sort of assume he must work there and is just waiting for the elevator. Elevator number 6 opens and he walks in. I stay waiting for elevator number 1 to get to my floor, but I feel instant relief as the doors shut behind him. As I can hear my elevator still traveling down to the lobby, I realize his hasn't started moving up. Instantly, I realize that he doesn't work there, as he clearly doesn't know how to use the code to get it to move. The doors to elevator number 1 finally open, and I rush in and start punching in my code. Right as the doors are about to shut, I see a hand grab them and force them open. He gets in, and the doors close as the elevator starts going up. He presses the button for floor 5, but it doesn't light up, and the elevator just keeps going and passes the 5th floor. He's not looking at me, but kind of just whimpering and grabbing his arm and keeps reaching into the side of his jacket. I don't say anything, but just kind of move into the corner as far away from him as possible. He just keeps looking at me, whimpering and rocking back and forth a little, his hand now just inside his inner jacket pocket, fumbling around. The elevator gets to the 14th floor, and I book out, and he just stays in the elevator. My office had the entire floor, but there was still another locked door to get into our lobby from the elevator. I run towards it with my key in my hand. I start to unlock it when I realize, like a fucking movie scene, the lock won't turn. Our doors were glass, and I see my coworker already at his desk inside looking at me, realizing something is not right. I look behind and see the guy in the elevator is now running full speed at me. His teeth are gritting and he is screaming/growling, and things feel like they are in slow motion. I start pounding on the door, and somehow my key instantly clicks and the door opens, and I slam it behind me as he smashes right into it. My coworker and I call 911, but the worst part was it took them like 20 minutes to arrive. We had to just stand there by the front glass doors and watch the guy who was pacing, putting his face against the glass and licking it and screaming at us. He couldn't leave the lobby because you need a code to get down, so we just had to watch him until police arrived and arrested him. Let me preface by telling you I took a very unconventional path through life, and when I was 19, I found myself roaming around the country, living out of my car. I would bounce from my friends' dorms and apartments, taking on odd jobs to put gas in my car and move from place to place. I stopped short of calling myself homeless, just on account of the fact that I chose to live like this. I'd received word that I could crash on a friend's couch in Detroit, and after doing the math, I figured I had just enough money to make it there on fumes. To avoid traffic, which could very well run down the precious little gas I had, I drove at night when I could share the road with deer and truckers. Late that night, I found myself driving along the interstate through rural Pennsylvania. As expected, the roads were empty except for the occasional trucker enjoying the open road. I used an atlas to plot my own routes, along with a notepad filled with advice and suggestions people had bestowed on me, interspersed with my calculations on distance, gas mileage, and funds. As this was around 20 years ago, high-tech was a monochrome cell phone that had spotty service in the best of these remote areas. Traveling under these means meant I had to be mindful of the needle on my fuel gauge, but I would still try to push it, knowing money was tight, and I found better gas prices once I got to Ohio. Eventually, I was forced to pull off the empty highway as the needle crept too close to empty for my comfort. Exiting the highway, I followed the signs directing me toward a gas station. I made a right and followed on the road longer than the sign had listed for gas. As I drove several miles along that dark, equally empty road, I noticed headlights coming around the bend ahead of me. After passing the only other vehicle on the road, I continued along until I saw headlights in my rearview mirror. Thinking nothing of it, I continued along to finally pull into a closed gas station. I panicked a little, not knowing if I had enough gas, if I needed to double back onto the highway and continue further on my drive. As I weighed my options and saw I had no cell phone service, I realized that while there was no one working, the pumps were open for card transactions. As I stepped out of my car and swiped my card, a car pulled in coming from the direction of the highway. They circled the pumps, then pulled up on the other side of the pump and rolled their window down. It must have been 2 a.m., and this disheveled man with a hat pulled low over the top half of his face started talking with me. "Where are you from?" he demands. "New York," I say, and nothing more. He snaps back. "I know you're from New York. I saw your license plate. Where in New York?" "All over." Given that I lived out of my car, all over was an accurate statement, but this didn't satisfy his request and continued to press me. "Well, what area of New York?" I don't know, the Bronx, Westchester?" "I know Westchester. Where in Westchester?" I give him the name of a random town that I'd never so much as stopped in, and he picked his head up just a little as he immediately responded, I'm from Pleasantville, too." Suddenly, he wanted to tell me his life story. "I'm stationed at the military base just up the road." He points in the direction opposite the way he came. "I'm out here in the middle of the night because I just got a call from my aunt that my mom is in the hospital and she's not doing well. I'm just trying to get home to Westchester to see her before she passes. Could you spare some money for gas?" I sympathize with him and explain to him my situation. I tell him I have just enough money to get where I'm going. This doesn't sit well with him, and I can hear his patience for me waning. "Give me your address, and I'll send you the money back. I work at the military base a few miles over there." He again points further down the road. At this point, I'm starting to feel a little cornered here, and I definitely don't believe his story. He looks like he hasn't shaved in a few days. He's wearing regular dirty street clothes, and even though he's trying to hide them, I can see he's got thick bags under his eyes. There's no way this guy is a member of the armed forces in good standing, and I've had enough. I tell him, "That doesn't change my situation. I don't have cash, and I just put the last of it in my tank." In a fit, this man drives off, turning left out of the gas station and driving towards the highway. And just as I think this is over, he cuts his wheel left and turns right back into the gas station. He circles around my car, and now, for the first time, I can see he's not alone in his car. He comes right back to where he had pulled up and asks, "Do you have a gun?" "What? Do you have a gun?" I don't know what to say to this. "What if I have a gun? Would you still not be able to help me out?" At this point, my adrenaline starts flowing, and I think to myself, I'm about to dose this motherfucker in gasoline while the pump is still running and run for it. He finally leans his face out of the window, and I see these deep bags and lines under his eyes. He's got to be in his mid-20s, but he looks like a hard 45. He starts repeating himself when the passenger grabs him by his shoulder. I can only see her mouth, and she's got on this bright red lipstick. I can't hear her talking, but whatever she says to him works, and then he yells at me, "You should probably buy a gun," and he drives off. He makes a left again out of the gas station, and I stand there dumbfounded as I watch him drive towards the highway one final time. The burst of adrenaline I had stayed with me long after he was gone. I grabbed a tire iron out of the trunk and headed towards the highway, driving through the rest of the night staring at my rear view until morning commuters finally begin filling the highways. Been a lurker for a while, but thought I would share my story here. When I started college in 2011, I formed a solid friendship group and threw myself into the social life. One guy in my block who always showed up to parties but never spoke much to anyone was a classic neckbeard, overweight, anime fan, lacking in social skills combined with awkward attempts to be overconfident. He also never washed, wore stained gray clothes that he never changed, had long, lank, greasy hair, and was surrounded by a cloud of BO. It would enter the room before he did. Sorry if this description sounds unnecessarily mean. I wouldn't normally judge people for these things in themselves, but combined with his behavior since, it's frankly warranted. With regret in hindsight, I made the mistake of chatting with him at one of these parties with the aim of being friendly and helping him get more integrated into the group. From that moment, a switch flipped in him, and he began obsessively stalking me, which would go on for the rest of freshman year. He would try to isolate me at social events, talking to me for hours and taking none of my cues that I wanted to bring it to a close. If I tried to lose him, he would find me. If I spent time with my actual friends, he would follow and force his way into the conversation, following me around like a wasp on a mission. If he saw me in public, he would give me this 1,000-yard unblinking stare, even from a couple 100 meters away, and would come over. It got to the point that I felt I had some kind of tracker on me because wherever I was, he would appear, even when leaving the campus library at 3 a.m. More than once at night, I looked through the spy hole in my door to the hall outside to see him standing there, staring intensely at my door. Obviously, this was seriously creepy behavior. I felt hunted. I was frightened and on alert all the time and started to avoid going out of my room. I also started going to my folks a lot just so I could get out of town. My friends were worried about me, and a couple of them confronted him about his behavior and asked him to leave me alone. This did not go down well. His obsession turned to rage. Thankfully, he kept more of a distance, but he would still hang out in places he knew I would be, staring at me now with intense hatred. He started telling everyone that I was his girlfriend and had dumped him in a horribly cruel way. It made me question myself that a few people actually believed him. This continued into our sophomore year when he got close to one of my housemates and started turning up unannounced at our place. This friend believed the stories he was telling and thought that I was being unfair in asking him not to bring this guy round to our house. He ended up stealing my mail, including a new bank card. I had no evidence that it was him, but I had so much stuff go missing, and I knew he was doing this. I also once found him in my bedroom. That was the last straw, and my roommate finally accepted that this guy had been lying. When I moved away, the in-person stuff stopped, but he started cyber-stalking me, trying daily to hack any of my accounts that he could find. This continued, though to a lesser extent, for a period of 3 years, but since then everything seemed to die down and I thought it was over. But I recently found his blog, where he writes fantasy stories about our relationship and calls me the love of his life, more than 10 years later. I just need to get this off my chest. My fiancé, 27-year-old male, and I, 23-year-old female, are soon to be married and are remodeling an old family home. We started working on the house about 2 or 3 months ago. My fiancé bought a bunch of tools to use on the house to renovate. The house has been sitting with nobody in it for over a year. Keep in mind, the house is located in a fairly rural area. A few houses and trailers here and there, but not too much traffic. We have a rodent problem and have been setting traps to catch them. 3 weeks ago, my fiancé went to check the traps and we had a rat that was alive. Long story short, he didn't want to take care of it, so he left. I got off work at 9 p.m. and went over to the house to take care of the rat. It was raining and my mom and brother came with me. I went to the back door and it was wide open and water was blowing into the house. I was pissed. I thought my fiancé had left the door open. I shut it and finished my business there. I asked my fiancé why he left the door open and he claimed he didn't. I called bullshit and left it at that. It didn't occur to me that somebody had possibly made a quick getaway. Fast forward to today. My fiancé and I went to our house to throw a whole bunch of trash and stuff into the dumpster we rented. When we went inside, we immediately noticed that some things were missing: drills, sanders, etc. We realized that they had been stolen. We call my mother-in-law and tell her about it, and she says to make a police report. What scares me so much about this is that everything began to click with the rat trap incident. Somebody has been scoping us out. I would go to our house by myself on many occasions and always had the creeps and felt watched. My little brother even remarked that he felt watched there and asked if we were sure nobody was in there while we were gone. I noticed today when I was there alone that my dog was acting very nervous and suspicious. She wasn't running and playing like she usually does and didn't want me to go to the backyard or wooded area. I'm glad I trusted her and my gut feeling. I don't know if the thieves were there, but I'm glad I didn't find out. We are currently in the process of installing cameras. This had to have been somebody that lives near us and can monitor how often we are there. Update. So, we did catch a car pulling in like it was scoping the place out. The people inside never got out, but they left. We asked a few of my fiancé's family members about it, and that was to our detriment. One of them went and spread the word that we have cameras, and somebody in the neighborhood who owned the vehicle that we caught on camera slipped up and said that they already knew things had been stolen. which to me is basically a confession because we hadn't told anybody about the robbery until the incident with the car we caught on camera. So now more people than necessary know, and we probably won't catch the person who did it. We still turned the footage into the police, though, and maybe they can dig up some background info. Okay, so I'm not conventionally pretty, nor classically pretty. I'm the Duffy in any friend group I'm in. I never worried about being hit on, disrespected, or kidnapped. I never had to worry about my own safety when going out, as I was never the one anyone wanted to get to know or be around because I'm so plain and it's always me that has to be on the lookout for my friends, male and female alike. Now, I like to go to a local bar almost daily. I don't drink alcohol there. I just get a normal Coke and wait for my ride home. It's my usual hangout spot after work, so I just sit and chill and mind my own business. Well, a few weeks ago, I had just gotten off work and was chilling at my usual spot and sipping on my drink while working on a new pendant I was making. I started wire wrapping crystals into jewelry. I didn't think anyone would try to talk to me since I knew I basically blended into the walls, even though the staff know me and pay me slight attention and are nice to me. But this weird guy I'd never seen before came over and sat at my table across from me. I was surprised and looked up at him and struck up a small conversation that I can't even remember how I started, but he started to ask me a few questions about myself that I thought were normal, and all flowed together, so I didn't think much of it. Again, I'm plain and didn't think anyone would want to do anything to me. I had drank 3 glasses of soda by then and had to use the restroom, so I grabbed my phone and purse and went to the bathroom. I may not have been worried about being abducted, but I did worry about my identity, cash, and contacts. I went back a few minutes later and went back to working since none of my stuff had been touched. I called a waitress over and asked her for a new drink, and she nodded, as it had always been ingrained in me that you never leave your drink unattended, and if you do, have it just remade or leave it to the bartender. As she was going to grab for my old drink, which only had a few sips taken out of it, the guy got a bit huffy at me, saying I was being wasteful for just ordering a new drink. I looked at him with a raised eyebrow in confusion. I asked him why it was his business if I did. It was my money after all, and the refills were free. He then said I was making more work for the waitress for no reason. This annoyed me, and I told him again that it was my business and that if he didn't like it, he can always leave. He then tried to wave the waitress off with letting her change my drink, but I'd had enough of his nonsense and told him flat out, "Then you drink it if you think it's such a waste." It seemed to have caught him off guard, and he looked at me shocked, then a bit angry, before leaving. I then looked at the drink and handed it to the waitress and told her that something didn't feel right about the guy that I was talking to, and if she could tell the bartender to keep an eye on him and dump out my drink and just bring me water from then on. I left for home after being picked up shortly after and found out the next day after work that he had been arrested for assault. I didn't find out till today what exactly happened. Apparently, he had gotten into a fight with the bartender working that night. The bartender caught him putting something into a girl's drink when she wasn't looking, and he stopped her from drinking it. The guy got mad, and it started a whole fight. The cops were called, and now he's awaiting trial. Apparently, he was trying to see if he could get someone like me who always had her guard down for herself because my confidence was low. He thought I'd be an easy mark and just with a little attention. But when I didn't just drink my drink when I came back, he had to try another girl. If he was really targeting me, I have to question his sanity and sobriety. Thank goodness for those old lessons about safety growing up. Thanks, Mom and Dad. I am a late 20s female, and this happened fairly recently. Nothing bad happened to me, but I'm lucky it didn't, and it easily could have. There's a conservation area that I used to like to walk in regularly. It's beside a golf course near an ordinary subdivision just off a busy road and is popular with dog walkers and photographers. The conservation area is fairly well maintained and alerts its users that there are hidden cameras everywhere. My point in bringing attention to all of this is to say that by all accounts this is a very safe, vanilla, urban wooded area in a populated place. One big thing about me is that I like isolation to recharge. I dislike crowded trails and by convention go in off-peak hours or when the weather is unpleasant. Not dangerous, but unpleasant, too cold, lightly raining, foggy, etc. I stay safe, but I like there to be as few people around as possible. In a city, in daylight, I don't feel like I'm taking any risks by doing this. First encounter. There was one day I went around 4 p.m. or so on a frigid, rainy Monday in November. On days like that, there are maybe only 1 or 2 dog walkers, but today there was no car in the parking lot except for a dirty blue pickup truck with a man sitting in it. I noticed that he was looking at me, but that didn't really bother me. I was just happy to see the trail was empty. On this particular day, I went to the area to practice my navigation skills. I was learning how to use a compass at that time, and it's good to practice that skill in an area that you won't get lost in. So I decided to go off-trail to a big pine plantation, which is a big, open area with large, mature pine trees, if you're not familiar. It's not a hiking area, or really that interesting in any way, and definitely off-trail. You wouldn't get there unless you really wanted to get there. So I pick my first landmark and sight it using my compass, and I'm pacing towards it. I find myself about halfway there when I hear rustling through the bushes, and I turn around to see the man from the dirty blue pickup truck there entering the pine plantation. Mid-50s, white man, a little pudgy, wearing a baggy beige cardigan and blue slacks. I feel pretty alert at this point, feels out of place somehow. I take note but pretend to keep walking around with my compass because I don't want to seem weird. I look at him. He pretends to ignore me. I'm getting a really bad gut feeling about the situation for some reason at this point, and I feel like he's following me. But I have an anxiety disorder, so I try to not freak out for zero reason, and I don't want to ruin my relaxation time. It's just a guy walking around. No big deal. To see if he's following me, I pivot 180 degrees and walk directly towards the trail again. He's still following me. I walk through the bushes onto the trail, still following me. At this point, I was freaked out. The pine plantation entrance is only about 50 feet on the trail, so this guy would have walked 50 feet, entered the pine plantation, then decided that was it for the day? Bad odds. Definitely following me. I quickly exit the trail, and when I'm leaving the parking lot, I see that he's still looking at me. I take the long way home. The experience freaks me out, and I only visit the area once before the second encounter. This time was in January. This time I want to go bird watching. A week prior, I had seen an owl in the same pine plantation. I was practicing navigation again, and I wanted to see it. I had seen it about an hour before sundown, so I figured that was a good time to try and see it again in the same area. I checked the parking lot, and there was no blue pickup truck, but there were 2 other cars with men. One was a red sedan with heavily tinted windows, and it looked like the other one was empty. So I go on the trail again. Today is muddy, wet, cold. Area should be totally empty. Good. Unfortunately, not so. About 20 feet on the trail, I hear footsteps behind me. I don't like when people walk behind me, but it's not a crime, and I'll lose them soon when I go to the pine plantation. I'm sure you know where this is going. When I walk on the pine plantation, there is the same rustling of the bushes as before, and when I turn around, I see the same man from before. I feel a wave of terror and dread come over me, alone in a muddy forest with a possible stalker. But it's still so calm, and it feels so mundane. To confirm my fears, I walk over to the area where I saw the owl last week and pause to look for it. Who do I see next to me? It's the same freaking guy from before. I am terrified at this point, and every part of me is screaming, "Run!" So I walk as fast as I can to the trail again. I pass some other random guy in the same pine plantation and smile at him, just totally on autopilot. He smiles back. It wasn't until I was in the parking lot where I get freaked out that there was a second person in the same pine plantation. Could they have been connected somehow? I stop briefly in the parking lot to take out a small notepad to quickly write down the license plates of the two cars. This gives the original man time to catch up to the parking lot. I'm booking it out on foot of the parking lot, and he yells towards me, "Can I give you a ride?" And I just shake my head and keep walking. As I walk away, he begins to follow me in his car. He waits at the intersection to see which direction I'm going in, and I decide to walk in a busy park to lose him. He pulls into a nearby hidden driveway and stares at me and takes out his phone to presumably take a photo of me. He notes what direction I'm walking in, then does a U-turn and drives fast the other way. Conclusion. I took the long way home, filled out a police report, and the police opened an investigation on it. I've not gone back to the conservation area since, and the experience has definitely left me with an ongoing nervousness about being alone. Doubly more because I do not know who the second guy is. I passed him so quickly I only know that he was mid-50s and had glasses and was bald. The police, unfortunately, told me there's nothing they can really do at this point, so the best I can do is stay vigilant and try to not let it freak me out too much. Unfortunately, this has totally ruined my love for going out into the wilderness alone. Nothing bad happened, but I think that was more because I was able to escape and lose him, or them, before anything did. I have never shared this story, except, strangely enough, to my teacher at the time. I was in the first grade at Northside Elementary in DeSoto, Texas. We lived about 3 blocks down, as my mother liked to call it. I personally feel it was a lot more. My sister and I were brought to school on a regular basis and walked home. My parents decided to divorce right at this time. My dad moved out and we started seeing him every other weekend. My mom began dating someone else, and I remember she no longer became interested in taking us to school as much. She became very preoccupied with her new relationship, and I remember that she often had me walking to school as well as coming home. Thinking back now, I'm not sure why I was late. There might have been a doctor's appointment or something. I remember that it wasn't very late at all, maybe just an hour or so after school started. My mom pulled up in the car and I got out. I remember hoping that she would wait there to watch me go up the flights of stairs and inside, but she drove right off, to my dismay. And this is when I saw him. A man, pretty normal looking, stepped out of a car looking directly at me. My mom had pulled off and this man was the only person around. He crossed the street quickly, at an angle, coming directly towards me. I remember turning and running up the steps. There were 3 flights of stairs with landings in between. When you are a little girl, these stairs seem much bigger. I remember looking over my shoulder and he was literally running up the stairs after me, and I had that horrible gut reaction and ran as fast as I could. I remember the double doors in front of me and I was panicked, thinking I would not make it. At that young age, I felt the energy coming from this otherwise normal-looking person who looked like a dad, and I remember the huge intrinsic feeling of doom and urgency to go through those doors. And I did. And I immediately turned around and saw him standing on part of the second set of stairs, and he just stood there looking at me as I looked at him from inside the building. And then he looked very frustrated and turned, walking away back to his car. I remember telling my teacher about it. Maybe a week later, a police detective showed up to interview me about what happened. This makes me think it may be connected to something that happened in that area at that time. I don't think I have ever been that afraid in my life, and it was a powerful internal fear. It was like my body told me to immediately run. Hello, little Vickies. Thanks so much for listening. If you like what you heard and you haven't subscribed already, please do, and hit the like button and leave a nice comment down below, as it's all very helpful to my growth on YouTube. I post every Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday by 5 p.m. Pacific. If you have a story of your own you'd like to share and possibly have read on the channel, send it to me at veronica45stories@gmail.com. Link is also in the description, as are other ways to support the channel if you're so inclined. Thanks again so much for being here. I appreciate it more than I can say. And until next time, be good.